The rope burns on Victoria's wrists were still raw when the auctioneer shoved her onto the platform in the dusty town square of Superior, Arizona. And she knew this September afternoon in 1882 would either be her end or her salvation. The sun beat down mercilessly on the crowd gathered before the makeshift stage, and Victoria Jefferson tried to keep her chin lifted despite the humiliation coursing through her veins. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, dirt smudged across the faded blue fabric, and her dark hair hung in tangled waves around her face. She had been traveling west with a wagon train when the attack came. Bandits had killed the family she was working for as a seamstress, stolen everything of value, and left her for dead in the desert. A man named Silas Crow had found her 2 days later, more dead than alive, and instead of showing mercy, he had decided to recoup his losses by selling her labor contract to the highest bidder. "Now here we got ourselves an interesting piece," Silas announced to the gathered crowd, his voice thick with calculated disdain. "She cleans up decent enough, I suppose, but I will be honest with you fine folks. This one here is damaged goods. Found her half dead in the sand. No family, no prospects, no skills worth mentioning. But someone might find use for her if the price is right." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her break. She scanned the crowd, seeing mostly weathered miners fresh from the surrounding copper mines, a few shopkeepers, and several ranchers who had come to town for supplies. Most looked at her with either pity or calculation, measuring her worth like they might measure a horse. "What am I bid for 5 years of her labor?" Silas called out. "Starting at $20. The crowd murmured, but no hands went up. Victoria's stomach twisted. If no one bid, Silas would take her north to one of the mining camps where women disappeared into lives of unspeakable hardship. "Come now, gentlemen," Silas pressed. "She can cook, clean, mend. Someone must have use for an extra pair of hands." $15, a gruff voice called from the back, and Victoria's heart sank as she recognized the speaker as Buck Morrison, a mine foreman known for his cruelty toward the men who worked for him. 15, do I hear 20? Silas's eyes gleamed. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, offering up a desperate prayer to whoever might be listening. When she opened them again, her gaze landed on a man standing slightly apart from the crowd. He was tall, lean in the way of men who spent their days working cattle under the brutal Arizona sun. His hat was pushed back just enough that she could see dark hair and a strong jaw shadowed with several days of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a clear gray that seemed to see right through the dirt and fear to something deeper. 20, Buck called out, sounding annoyed now. The tall cowboy had not moved, but Victoria found herself hoping irrationally that he would say something. $20 going once, Silas announced. The cowboy shifted his weight, his jaw tightening, going twice. $100. The crowd went silent, every head turning to stare at the man who had spoken. Even Silas seemed stunned into momentary speechlessness. Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs. "I am sorry, did you say 100? Silas finally managed. The cowboy stepped forward and the crowd parted for him. "You heard me right. $100 for her contract, full and clear." "Now, son, that is mighty generous, but I should warn you, like I said, she is damaged goods. Found her nearly dead, and Lord knows what those bandits did to her before they left her. You could get yourself a fresh worker from back east for that kind of money." Victoria felt her face flush with shame, but the cowboy's expression darkened with anger. "I heard what you said." His voice was low, controlled, but there was steel beneath it. "And I am telling you she is worth every penny and more. Now do we have a deal, or do I need to take my money elsewhere?" Silas practically tripped over himself to agree. No, no, of course we have a deal. Very wise investment, Mr. Ashford Xavier. Mr. Xavier, of course. If you will just sign here and here. Victoria watched in a daze as the transaction was completed. $100 changed hands, papers were signed, and just like that, her fate shifted again. She did not know if it was for better or worse, but something in Ashford Xavier's steady gray eyes made her think it might be the former. When the papers were finalized, Ashford approached the platform and offered his hand to help her down. His grip was firm but gentle, and up close she could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the sun, the calluses on his palms from working rope and leather. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse and emotion. "No need for thanks," he replied quietly. "Let's get you out of here." He led her through the crowd, ignoring the stares and whispers, to where a sturdy buckskin horse waited. He untied the reins and then turned to her with an awkward expression. "I apologize, but I only brought one horse. It is about 3 miles to my ranch. Can you ride?" "I can try," Victoria said, though in truth she had only been on a horse a handful of times in her life. Ashford nodded and swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down for her. She placed her foot on top of his boot in the stirrup and let him pull her up behind him. The saddle was barely big enough for one person, let alone two, and she had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling. "Hold tight," he said, and urged the horse into a steady walk. They rode in silence through Superior's Main Street, past the assay office and the general store, the saloon and the small church. The town was rough and dusty, built up around the copper mines that were slowly making their mark on the Arizona territory. Beyond the last buildings, the landscape opened up into high desert country, dotted with mesquite and palo verde trees, backed by rugged mountains that glowed rust red in the afternoon light. Victoria had so many questions, but she did not know where to begin. Who was this man? Why had he paid such an outrageous sum for her contract? What did he expect from her? The fear that had momentarily receded began to creep back in. As if sensing her tension, Ashford spoke without turning his head. "I want you to know something, Miss Jefferson. I did not buy your contract to take advantage of you. I need help at the ranch, that is true, but I will not force you to do anything you are not willing to do. You will have your own room, your own space, and if at any time you want to leave, you are free to go." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were from relief rather than fear. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." Ashford was quiet for a long moment. "My mother died when I was 12, he finally said. "She got sick, and my father could not afford a doctor. By the time help came, it was too late. Before she passed, she made me promise that if I ever had the means to help someone in need, I would do it. No questions, no hesitation. When I saw you standing on that platform, and I heard that man call you damaged goods." His voice hardened. "Well, I have known enough hardship in my life to recognize the look of someone who just needs a chance. Everyone deserves at least that much." Victoria tightened her arms around him, blinking back tears. "I will work hard," she promised. "I will earn every penny you paid." "I am not worried about that," Ashford replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a dark speck against the landscape, then resolving into a low adobe house with a porch running along the front, a barn and several corrals, and stretches of fencing that marked out grazing land. It was modest but well maintained, and Victoria felt something ease in her chest at the sight of it. It looked like a home. Ashford dismounted first, then helped her down. Her legs were shaky from the ride and from exhaustion, and she might have stumbled if he had not steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you inside and cleaned up. Then we can talk about everything else." The interior of the house was simple but clean. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a rough wooden table with 4 chairs in the center. A doorway led to what appeared to be a bedroom, and Ashford gestured to another door on the opposite side. "That was my mother's sewing room," he said. "I've been using it for storage, but there is a bed in there. It will need some cleaning, but it is yours if you want it." "It sounds perfect," Victoria said softly. Ashford nodded and moved to pump water into a large basin. "I will heat some water for you. There are towels in the chest by the fireplace. Take your time getting cleaned up, and then we can figure out supper." Victoria wanted to protest, to insist she should be the one preparing the meal since he had just paid so much for her. But exhaustion was creeping through her bones, and the thought of washing away the dust and grime of the past days was almost overwhelming in its appeal. "Thank you," she said again, and this time Ashford turned to meet her eyes. "You are welcome," he replied simply. By the time Victoria had washed and changed into the clean dress Ashford had produced from a trunk, she felt almost human again. The dress had belonged to his mother and was a bit loose on her, but it was clean and whole, and that was more than she had dared hope for this morning. She found a brush in the small room and worked through the tangles in her hair until it fell in dark waves past her shoulders. When she emerged, Ashford had a fire going and was slicing salt pork into a skillet. He glanced up at her entrance and then did a double take, his eyes widening slightly before he caught himself and returned his attention to the stove. "Feel better?" he asked. "Much," Victoria said. "Please let me do that. It is the least I can do." Ashford hesitated, then stepped aside. "I will not argue with you. I am a decent cook by necessity, but I cannot say I enjoy it much." Victoria took over the cooking, finding comfort in the familiar task. She fried the pork and then used the grease to cook eggs, adding wild onions she found hanging in the corner. There was bread that was going stale, so she toasted it over the fire. It was simple fare, but more than she had eaten in days. They sat across from each other at the table, and for a few minutes there was only the sound of eating. Then Ashford cleared his throat. "I suppose we should talk about the arrangement," he said. "The contract Silas had drawn up was for 5 years of labor. But like I said outside, I am not going to hold you to that if you decide this is not where you want to be. As for the work itself, I run about 200 head of cattle on this land, plus some horses. I do most of the ranch work myself, but it would help to have someone managing the house, doing the cooking and mending, maybe tending a garden. If you are willing and able, you could also help with some of the lighter ranch work during busy times. In exchange, you get room and board, and I will pay you $10 a month on top of that." "Does that sound fair?" Victoria stared at him. "You want to pay me, on top of everything else, of course. You will be working, you should be paid for it." "But you already paid $100 for my contract." Ashford shrugged. "That was to get you away from Silas Crow. This is different. If you are going to be living here and working here, you deserve fair wages." Victoria felt something warm unfold in her chest, something that had been frozen since the bandit attack. Hope, she realized. It was hope. "Then yes," she said. "It sounds more than fair. It sounds generous." "Good," Ashford said and smiled for the first time since they had met. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. Victoria found herself smiling back. They cleaned up the dishes together, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. When everything was put away, Ashford showed her around the property properly. The barn was home to 4 horses, including the buckskin he had ridden into town, a milk cow, and a few chickens. The tack room was neatly organized, and Victoria noticed the quality of the leather and the care taken in the maintenance. "You do good work," she observed, running her hand along a saddle. "My father was a saddle maker," Ashford explained. "Before he started ranching, he taught me the trade, and it comes in handy out here. I do repair work for some of the other ranchers when they need it." "I am a seamstress," Victoria offered, "or I was before." She trailed off. "Before Sela's crow decided to play slave trader," Ashford finished, his voice hard. "That man is going to get what is coming to him one day." Victoria shivered despite the lingering heat of the evening. "He said he found me and had a right to recoup his costs. Is that true? Could he come back and demand more?" "No," Ashford said firmly. "The contract is legal and binding. You belong to yourself, Miss Jefferson. The contract just says you have agreed to work for me. But like I said, if you ever want to leave, you can. I will put that in writing if it makes you feel better." "It would," Victoria admitted. "And please call me Victoria." "Victoria," Ashford repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice. "You can call me Ashford or Ash if you prefer. Most folks do." That night, lying in the narrow bed in what had been his mother's sewing room, Victoria stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything that had happened. This morning she had been certain her life was over, that she would be sold to some brutal mine boss or worse. Now she was lying in a clean bed, her stomach full, in the home of a man who had called her priceless, when another had called her damaged. She had seen the way Ashford looked at her, the flash of something in his eyes when she had come out in his mother's dress. But more than that, she had seen kindness in him, a decency that seemed rare in this hard country. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like she might actually have one. The days fell into a pattern after that. Victoria woke before dawn and started the fire, made coffee and breakfast. Ashford would eat quickly and head out to check on the cattle or mend fences or any of 100 other tasks that went into running a ranch. Victoria would clean the house, tend the small vegetable garden that was struggling in the late summer heat, feed the chickens and collect eggs, do the washing and mending. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and she found satisfaction in it. In the evenings, they would share supper and talk. Ashford told her about growing up in Texas, how his father had moved them to Arizona after his mother died, searching for a fresh start. He spoke about learning to work cattle, about buying this land 3 years ago with money he had saved from working on other ranches. He was 26 years old, unmarried and fiercely independent. Victoria shared her own story in bits and pieces. She was 22, had grown up in Missouri with parents who had died of cholera when she was 16. She had worked as a seamstress in St. Louis for several years, saving money for a new life out west. When she heard about opportunities in California, she had signed on with a family as a traveling seamstress, planning to continue on to San Francisco once they reached California. The attack had destroyed all of that. "I keep thinking about the family," she said one evening, her voice soft. "The Hendersons, they had 2 little girls. Mary was 6 and Emma was 4. They were so excited about their new life, and then in one afternoon it was all over." Ashford reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "It was not your fault." "I know," Victoria whispered, "but I was there. I survived and they did not." "Why?" "There is no good answer to that," Ashford said gently, "but I am glad you survived. And I think if the Hendersons could know that you got a second chance, they would be glad too." Victoria turned her hand over so their palms were touching. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for seeing me as a person when that man saw me as nothing." Ashford's fingers tightened around hers. "He was wrong," he said fiercely. "You are not nothing. You are not damaged. You are strong and capable and worth more than all the money in the territory." Their eyes met across the table, and Victoria felt something shift between them, something that had been building since that first day in Superior. Then Ashford seemed to catch himself and pulled his hand back, clearing his throat. "I should check on the horses," he said, standing abruptly. "You must be tired. Don not wait up." He left before Victoria could respond, and she sat alone at the table, her hand still tingling from his touch. She understood his hesitation. He had bought her contract, and even though he insisted she was free, there was still a power imbalance between them. Any relationship would be complicated by that reality. But she could not deny what she was beginning to feel for him, this quiet, principled man who had saved her life without even knowing it. 3 weeks after Victoria arrived at the ranch, Ashford came back from town with news. There was going to be a dance at the community hall on Saturday night to celebrate the end of the brutal summer heat. Most of the ranching families in the area would be there, along with miners and townspeople. "I thought you might like to go," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "You have been working so hard, and it would be a chance to meet some of the other women in the area. But if you would rather not, I understand." Victoria's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of facing a crowd of strangers made her stomach clench with anxiety. But another part of her, the part that had been slowly coming back to life over the past weeks, wanted to go, wanted to wear a pretty dress and dance and feel normal again. "I would like that," she said, "but I do not have anything appropriate to wear." Ashford's face brightened. "There is fabric in the trunk with my mother's things. She was always buying material she never got around to using. Maybe you could make something." Victoria spent the next few days working on a dress in the evenings after her chores were done. She found beautiful deep green cotton in the trunk, along with some cream-colored lace that would make a nice trim. Her hands remembered the familiar work, and she found peace in the steady rhythm of cutting and stitching. When Saturday evening arrived, Victoria put on the finished dress and studied her reflection in the small mirror in her room. The green brought out the color in her eyes, and the fitted bodice and full skirt were flattering. She had washed her hair and pinned it up, leaving a few curls to frame her face. She barely recognized herself. When she stepped out into the main room, Ashford was standing by the door in clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing. He turned at the sound of her footsteps and froze, his eyes going wide. "Victoria," he breathed, "you look beautiful." She felt her cheeks warm with pleasure. "Thank you. The fabric was beautiful to work with." "It is not the fabric," Ashford said, his voice rough. Then he seemed to catch himself and cleared his throat. "We should go. I told the Martins we would meet them there." The ride to town was different this time, charged with an awareness that had not been there before. Victoria sat behind Ashford on the horse, her arms around his waist, acutely conscious of everywhere their bodies touched. She wondered if he felt it too, this pull between them that seemed to grow stronger every day. The community hall was already full of people when they arrived. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the crowd. A small group of musicians was tuning up in the corner, and tables along one wall were laden with food that various families had brought. Ashford introduced Victoria to what felt like dozens of people. There was Samuel Martin and his wife Grace, who ran a horse ranch north of town. Tom Brennan and his wife Sarah, who owned the general store. The Kincaid family, the Johnsons, the Weatherbys. Everyone was friendly, though Victoria could sense some curiosity about her sudden appearance as Ashford's employee. "We are so glad to have another young woman in the area," Grace Martin said warmly. She was a petite blonde woman about Victoria's age, with kind eyes and an easy smile. "There are far too few of us out here. You must come to the ladies' gathering next month. We meet once a month to quilt and catch up on news." "I would like that," Victoria said, and found she meant it. The music started, and couples began to move onto the dance floor. Ashford appeared at Victoria's elbow, looking nervous again. "Would you like to dance?" he asked. Victoria had not danced in years, but she nodded and let him lead her out onto the floor. His hand settled at her waist, and she placed her hand on his shoulder, and then they were moving to the music. Ashford was a surprisingly good dancer, confident and smooth, and Victoria found herself relaxing into the rhythm. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked. "My mother insisted," Ashford replied with a smile. "She said a gentleman should always know how to dance properly. I think she had hopes of me finding a nice girl and settling down." "And did you? Find a nice girl, I mean." Ashford's eyes met hers, intense and searching. "I am working on it," he said quietly. Victoria's breath caught. Before she could respond, the song ended and another began, this one faster. Other couples swept past them, laughing and spinning, and the moment was broken. But for the rest of the evening, Victoria felt like she was floating, buoyed by the warmth in Ashford's eyes and the possibility humming between them. They stayed until late, dancing and talking with the other ranchers. Victoria learned about the challenges of making a living in this harsh country, about the constant struggle for water, the threat of drought and bandits and disease. But she also saw the strength of the community, the way people looked out for each other and helped when times were hard. On the ride home, exhausted and happy, Victoria rested her head against Ashford's back and let the steady rhythm of the horse's gait lull her into a doze. She woke when they reached the ranch, blinking in confusion as Ashford dismounted and reached up to help her down. "Sorry," she mumbled. "I fell asleep." "Do not apologize," Ashford said, his hands lingering at her waist even after her feet were on the ground. "You have been working hard. You deserved a night to enjoy yourself." They stood close together in the moonlight, and Victoria could see the conflict playing across Ashford's face. He wanted to kiss her, she realized. And God help her, she wanted him to. But he was too honorable, too conscious of the power dynamic between them. So Victoria made the choice for both of them. She rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, soft and tentative. For a moment, Ashford went rigid with surprise, and then he was kissing her back, one hand coming up to cup her face while the other pulled her closer. The kiss was gentle but intense, full of weeks of denied longing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ashford rested his forehead against hers. "We should not," he said, though his arms remained around her. "The contract." "The contract is just paper," Victoria said firmly. "You told me I was free. That means I am free to make my own choices, and I choose this. I choose you if you will have me." Ashford pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "Victoria, I have wanted to say something for weeks now, but I did not want you to feel obligated." "You do not owe me anything, no matter what I paid for that contract." "I know that," Victoria said. "This is not about obligation, Ashford. This is about how I feel when I am with you. How safe you make me feel, how seen. When that auctioneer called me damaged goods, I believed him. But you looked at me and saw something different. You saw me as I want to be seen. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." Ashford inhaled sharply. "You love me?" "Yes," Victoria said simply. "I love you." A smile spread across Ashford's face, bright and joyous. "Thank God," he said. "Because I have been in love with you since the moment I saw you standing on that platform, trying so hard to be brave. You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I knew I had to get you away from there. But I never imagined you might feel the same way." "I do," Victoria said, "so very much." Ashford kissed her again, longer this time, deeper. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "We should probably go inside," Ashford said reluctantly. "It is late and we both have work tomorrow." "Together," Victoria said. "We have work together." "Together," Ashford agreed, and the word sounded like a promise. The next weeks were the happiest of Victoria's life. She and Ashford fell into a new rhythm, one that included stolen kisses in the barn and held hands across the dinner table and long talks on the porch after the sun went down. They were courting, Victoria supposed, though the circumstances were far from traditional. Ashford was a thoughtful and attentive partner. He brought her wildflowers from the range and helped with the dishes, even though she protested. He taught her to ride properly on a gentle mare named Daisy, and laughed when she whooped with joy at managing a canter. He listened when she talked about her fears and her dreams, and shared his own in return. "I want to expand the ranch," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains red and gold. "Not too much, but enough to be really profitable. Maybe breed some horses on the side. My father's dream was to build something lasting, something that could be passed down. I want to honor that." "You will," Victoria said with certainty. "You are one of the most determined people I have ever met." Ashford took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I want you to be part of it," he said quietly. "This ranch, this life. I know it has only been a couple months and maybe it is too soon, but Victoria, I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Will you marry me?" Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Ashford let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and pulled her into his arms. "I do not have a ring yet," he said against her hair, "but I promise I will get you one, the prettiest one I can find." "I do not need a ring," Victoria said. "I just need you." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Superior, with half the ranching families in the area in attendance. Victoria wore a new dress she had made from white cotton, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ashford wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Victoria felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting at the altar. Grace Martin stood as her attendant, and Samuel Martin stood up for Ashford. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the pastor pronounced them man and wife and Ashford kissed her, Victoria felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The reception was held at the community hall, with food and music and dancing. At one point, Victoria found herself standing with Grace and Sarah Brennan watching the crowd. "You look so happy," Grace observed with a warm smile. "I am," Victoria said. "I never thought I would be after everything that happened, but Ashford, he gave me back my life, my hope." "He is a good man," Sarah agreed. "And it is clear he adores you, the way he looks at you like you hung the moon." Victoria blushed but could not stop smiling. Later, as she and Ashford danced together, she leaned close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" Ashford asked. "For seeing me," Victoria said. "For choosing me when no one else would." Ashford pulled her closer. "You have it backwards," he murmured. "Thank you for choosing me, for giving me the chance to love you." "Always," Victoria promised. That night, alone together for the first time as husband and wife, they stood in the bedroom of the ranch house and held each other close. Ashford was gentle and patient, mindful of Victoria's fears and her past trauma. They took their time exploring this new intimacy, learning each other with hands and lips and whispered words. And when they finally came together, it was with tenderness and love, a joining that felt sacred in its intensity. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Victoria traced patterns on Ashford's chest and marveled at how much her life had changed. "What are you thinking?" Ashford asked sleepily. "That I am the luckiest woman alive," Victoria said. "That I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone," Ashford pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I am the lucky one," he said. "When I rode into town that day, I never imagined I would find my whole future standing on that platform." "Damaged goods," Victoria said with a hint of bitterness. "Priceless," Ashford corrected firmly. "You were priceless then, and you are priceless now. You are everything to me, Victoria. Everything." Victoria felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Ashford replied. "Now and always." The first winter of their marriage was hard but rewarding. The temperatures dropped, and snow occasionally dusted the higher elevations of the mountains. The cattle needed extra attention, and Ashford spent long days making sure they had enough to eat and access to water. Victoria kept the house warm and welcoming, the stove always burning, hot meals always ready. She also discovered she was pregnant in late December. At first she was not sure, but when she missed her monthly courses for the second time and began feeling nauseated in the mornings, the truth became clear. She decided to tell Ashford on Christmas Day. She woke before him that morning and prepared a special breakfast, including precious eggs and bacon they had been saving. When Ashford came to the table, he looked at the spread in surprise. "What is this?" he asked with a smile. "Did I forget some special occasion?" "Not forget," Victoria said, suddenly nervous. "Just there is something I want to tell you, a Christmas present of sorts." Ashford sat down, his expression becoming serious. "What is it? Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect," Victoria said quickly. "Better than perfect." "Ashford, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." Ashford's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, and then pure joy. He surged to his feet and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Victoria laughed, holding him tight. "Sometime in the summer, I think. Are you happy?" "Happy." Ashford pulled back to look at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "Victoria, I am beyond happy. This is the best Christmas present I could ever receive. You are giving me a family. A real family." Victoria felt her own tears start to fall. "We are already a family," she said, "but yes, we will be expanding it." Ashford knelt down and placed his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Victoria ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this gentle, honorable man who had become her whole world. The pregnancy was mostly easy, though Victoria struggled with fatigue in the early months. Ashford was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting she rest more and take on fewer physical tasks. Victoria appreciated his concern, but also had to remind him that she was pregnant, not fragile. "I am a rancher's wife," she told him firmly one afternoon when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I cannot spend the next 6 months sitting around doing nothing." "I just want to make sure you and the baby are safe," Ashford protested. "And we will be," Victoria said, softening her tone. "But I need to feel useful, Ashford. I need to contribute. Just maybe I will skip the heavier chores and leave those to you." Ashford reluctantly agreed, and they found a new balance. Victoria continued to cook and clean and do lighter work, while Ashford took on anything that required heavy lifting or long hours outside. Spring arrived with its usual glory, the desert coming alive with wildflowers and the cattle producing new calves. Victoria's belly swelled as the baby grew, and she felt the first flutters of movement in April, then stronger kicks as May progressed. "Feel this," she said one evening, grabbing Ashford's hand and placing it on her stomach. A moment later, the baby kicked hard, and Ashford's eyes went wide. "Was that was your son or daughter saying hello," Victoria said with a grin, Ashford looked at her with such wonder and love that Victoria felt her heart might overflow. "I love you so much," he said. "Both of you." In June, Grace Martin threw a small party for Victoria, inviting the women from the area to help prepare for the baby's arrival. They brought gifts they had made, tiny gowns and blankets, booties and bonnets. Victoria was overwhelmed by their generosity and kindness. "We take care of our own out here," Sarah Brennan said when Victoria tried to thank them. "You are one of us now, Victoria. We look after each other." Victoria thought about how different her life might have been if Ashford had not been in Superior that day, if he had not stood up to Sela's crow and claimed her as priceless. She might have died or worse. Instead, she was surrounded by friends, married to a man she loved desperately, about to bring a new life into the world. The gratitude she felt was almost painful in its intensity. The baby came in late July during a heat wave that made the adobe house feel like an oven. Victoria's labor started just before dawn, and Ashford immediately sent word to Grace Martin, who had experience as a midwife. Grace arrived within an hour, calm and competent, and took charge of the situation. "First babies can take a while," she told Ashford, who was pacing the main room like a caged animal. "Why don't you go take care of the morning chores and give Victoria some space? I will call you if anything changes." Ashford looked reluctant to leave, but Victoria managed a smile despite the pain of another contraction. "Go," she said. "I will be fine." The labor lasted through the morning and into the afternoon. Victoria had known it would be painful, but the reality was worse than she had imagined. Grace was wonderful, coaching her through each contraction, offering sips of water and cool cloths for her forehead. "You are doing beautifully," Grace kept saying. "Just a little longer." Finally, as the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, Grace said the words Victoria had been waiting for. "It is time to push. On the next contraction, bear down as hard as you can." Victoria did, gritting her teeth against the pain, and then again, and again. Just when she thought she could not do it anymore, she felt a sudden release of pressure and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's cry. "It is a boy," Grace announced, her face lit with joy. "A big, healthy boy." She cleaned the baby quickly and then placed him in Victoria's arms. Victoria looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. He had a shock of dark hair and gray eyes that would probably change color, but that, for now, reminded her of Ashford. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I am your mama." The door burst open and Ashford rushed in, his face anxious. "I heard crying. Is everything all right? Is Victoria okay?" "Everything is perfect," Grace said with a smile. "Come meet your son." Ashford crossed to the bed and stared down at the baby in Victoria's arms. His expression was one of complete awe. "He is so small," he whispered. "Here," Victoria said, shifting the bundle. "Hold him." Ashford took the baby with the careful reverence of someone handling the most precious thing in the world. The baby blinked up at him, and Ashford made a choked sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Hey there, little man," he said softly. "I am your daddy. And I promise I am going to take such good care of you and your mama. You are so loved already, so very loved." Victoria watched her husband with their son and felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was her family, her home. And it had all started because one man had looked at her and seen her worth when the world saw none. They named the baby Andrew Joseph Xavier, after both his grandfathers. Andrew thrived, growing quickly despite the summer heat. He was a good baby for the most part, though he had strong opinions about when he wanted to eat and sleep. Ashford was a devoted father, getting up with Victoria for nighttime feedings and changing diapers without complaint. "I never thought I would be this happy," he told Victoria one night as they stood over Andrew's cradle, watching him sleep. "Sometimes I am afraid to even believe it is real." "It is real," Victoria assured him. "This is our life, Ashford, the life we built together." As Andrew grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Ashford expanded the herd as planned and began breeding horses on the side, working with a stallion he purchased from Samuel Martin. The horses proved popular with other ranchers, and soon Ashford had a waiting list for his foals. Victoria took on sewing work from some of the other ranch families, making and mending clothes in the evenings after Andrew was asleep. The extra income was welcome, but more than that, she enjoyed the work and the connection it gave her to the community. When Andrew was 2 years old, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less nervous about it, confident in her body's ability to bring a child into the world. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in the spring of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose Xavier, after Ashford's mother. Sarah was smaller than Andrew had been, but just as healthy, with a cap of blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. Andrew was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feedings. Watching her son gently stroke his sister's tiny hand, Victoria felt her heart could not possibly hold any more love, but somehow it did. Every day seemed to bring new joys, new challenges, new reasons to be grateful. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Ashford built an addition onto the house, giving the children their own room and creating a proper parlor. Victoria planted a larger garden and added fruit trees that would take years to mature, but that represented their commitment to this place, this life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ashford took Victoria to Superior for a special dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was a rare treat to eat a meal someone else had cooked, and rarer still to spend time alone together without the children. Grace had agreed to watch Andrew and Sarah for the evening, insisting they deserved a night to themselves. Over dessert, Ashford reached across the table and took Victoria's hand. "Do you remember the first time we came to town together?" he asked. "Of course," Victoria said. "How could I forget? You had just bought my contract from that horrible man. I was terrified about what was going to happen next." "I was terrified too," Ashford admitted. "I had just spent every penny I had saved for breeding stock on a woman I did not know. I had no idea if I had just made the best decision of my life or the worst." "And," Victoria prompted with a smile, "best decision," Ashford said firmly. "Without question. Victoria, these past 5 years have been everything I never knew I needed. You have made me happier than I ever imagined possible. You have given me a family, a real home. I wake up every morning grateful that I walked into Superior on that particular day." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. "I am grateful too," she said. "You saved my life, Ashford, and not just physically. You gave me back my sense of self-worth. You made me believe I deserved love and happiness. I will never be able to repay you for that." "You do not need to repay me," Ashford said. "Loving you is not a debt. It is a privilege." They finished their meal and walked through the town in the cool evening air. Superior had grown in the 5 years since Victoria had arrived, with more buildings and more people drawn by the copper mines. But the basics remained the same: the church, the general store, the community hall where they had danced at their first social together. "You ever think about that auction?" Victoria asked quietly. "About what would have happened if you had not been there that day?" "Yes," Ashford said honestly. "And it makes me sick to think about, but you were strong, Victoria. You would have survived somehow. You are the strongest person I know." Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder as they walked. "I do not know about that," she said. "But I know I am strong enough now, because of you, because of our family." They stood outside the general store, and Victoria found herself looking at the town square where the auction had taken place. The platform was long gone, but the memory was vivid. "Damaged goods," she murmured. "Priceless," Ashford corrected, just as he had that first day. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face. "You were priceless then, when you stood on that platform trying so hard to be brave. You are priceless now as my wife and the mother of my children. And you will be priceless every day for the rest of our lives. Do you understand? Your worth has never changed. That man was wrong about you, Victoria. So very wrong." Victoria stood on her toes and kissed him, there in the middle of Superior's Main Street, not caring who might see. "I love you," she said against his lips. "Thank you for seeing what no one else could." "I love you too," Ashford replied. "More than words can say." The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. There were good years when the rains came and the cattle thrived, and hard years when drought turned the range brown and Ashford had to sell off part of the herd. There were celebrations and holidays spent with their growing circle of friends and neighbors, and quiet evenings at home as a family. Andrew grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working alongside his father on the ranch. Sarah was more adventurous, always wanting to explore and try new things. When Sarah was 5, Victoria gave birth to another son they named Matthew David Xavier. Matthew was a happy, easygoing baby who seemed content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes. Ashford proved to be a wonderful father, patient and kind but firm when needed. He taught Andrew to ride and rope, to care for the horses and cattle. He indulged Sarah's curious nature, answering her endless questions about how things worked. And he walked the floor with Matthew when the baby was fussy, singing lullabies in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. Victoria watched her husband with their children and fell more in love with him every day. This was the life he had given her, messy and chaotic and full of love. This was what she had been meant for all along, even when she had been standing on that auction platform certain her life was over. When Andrew was 10, Sarah was 8, and Matthew was 3, the family took a trip to Tucson for supplies and to visit a horse breeder Ashford wanted to do business with. It was a rare adventure, and the children were excited about seeing the bigger city. They stayed in a hotel, which the children thought was the height of luxury. Victoria took Sarah and Matthew to see the shops while Ashford and Andrew looked at horses. That evening, they all went to dinner at a restaurant with white tablecloths and candles. "This is nice," Andrew observed, looking around at the elegant surroundings, "but I still like home better." "Me too," Sarah agreed. "Can we go home tomorrow?" Ashford and Victoria exchanged amused glances. "Yes," Ashford said, "we will head home tomorrow." "But you know, when I was your age, I dreamed about living in a big city like this. I thought that was where all the excitement was." "What changed your mind?" Andrew asked. Ashford looked at Victoria, his expression soft. "I figured out that excitement is not the same as happiness," he said. "Real happiness comes from being with the people you love, doing work that matters. I found that on the ranch. I found that with your mother." "How did you and Mama meet?" Sarah asked. She had heard the story before, but she never seemed to tire of it. Victoria hesitated, unsure how much to share with her young children. But Ashford reached over and took her hand, and she found her voice. "Your father saved me," she said simply. "I was in trouble, and he helped me when no one else would. He saw value in me when others did not. And he gave me a chance at a new life." "Papa is a hero," Matthew declared, and everyone laughed. "Your mother is the hero," Ashford corrected. She is the bravest, strongest person I know. Everything good in my life started when I met her." That night, after the children were asleep in their hotel room and Victoria and Ashford lay together in the darkness, Victoria turned to her husband. "You ever have regrets?" she asked quietly. "About how we started, about the circumstances?" Ashford was silent for a moment, considering. "I regret that you had to go through what you went through," he finally said. "The attack, losing the Hendersons, being sold like property by Silas Crow. I wish I could have spared you all of that, but I do not regret what happened after. I do not regret buying your contract or bringing you home or falling in love with you. Those are the best things I have ever done." "I do not regret it either," Victoria said. "Not anymore. For a long time I was angry about what happened, angry at fate or God or whoever decides these things. But now I think maybe it had to happen that way. Maybe I had to lose everything to find what really mattered." "What really matters?" Ashford prompted. "This," Victoria said, gesturing in the darkness to encompass their sleeping children, the life they had built together. "Love, family, home. That is what really matters." Ashford pulled her close and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You are absolutely right," he murmured. "That is all that really matters." The Xavier Ranch continued to thrive over the next decade. Ashford's reputation as a horse breeder grew, and he was able to command good prices for his stock. Victoria's sewing business expanded until she was making not just utilitarian clothing, but also fancy dresses for special occasions, wedding gowns, and baby clothes. She trained Sarah in the craft, and together they created beautiful garments that were sought after throughout the territory. Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, and the Xavier family attended the celebration in Phoenix. Andrew was 25 by then, already running much of the ranch operations. He had married a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch, and they lived in a small house Ashford had helped Andrew build on the far side of the property. Sarah was 23 and engaged to a young lawyer named Thomas, who had recently moved to Superior. The wedding was planned for the fall, and Victoria was making her daughter's wedding dress, pouring all her love and skill into every stitch. Matthew was 18 and preparing to go to college in Tucson, the first member of the family to pursue higher education. He wanted to study agriculture so he could bring modern techniques back to the ranch. Ashford and Victoria were in their early 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined from years of sun and wind. But they moved through life with the easy contentment of people who had found exactly where they belonged. One evening in June, they sat on the porch swing they had added years ago, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was finally cooling after another scorching summer day, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear cattle lowing. "You remember the dance?" Victoria asked suddenly. "The first one we went to together," Ashford smiled. "Of course. You wore that green dress you made, and I could barely breathe when I saw you. I wanted to kiss you so badly that night." "I wanted you to," Victoria admitted, "but I knew you were being honorable, waiting until I was ready." "I would have waited forever," Ashford said. "You were worth waiting for." Victoria leaned against his shoulder. "We have had a good life, haven't we?" "The best," Ashford agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "Do you ever think about that day in Superior?" Victoria asked. "The auction?" "Sometimes," Ashford said. "Usually when I need to remind myself how lucky I am, how close I came to missing out on all of this." "I think about it too," Victoria said. "About what the auctioneer said, damaged goods." She shook her head. "For so long I believed him. I thought I was broken, worthless. But you never saw me that way." Ashford turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. "Because you were never those things. You were hurt, yes, you had been through trauma, but that did not diminish your value. Nothing could do that. You called me priceless, Victoria said softly. Do you remember? Of course I remember. It was the truth then, and it is the truth now. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes even after all these years. You saved me, Ashford, in every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, Ashford corrected. I was alone, Victoria. I had the ranch, but I did not have a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me that. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, something meaningful. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Victoria thought about the girl she had been, standing terrified on that auction platform. She thought about the man who had seen her value when no one else had. And she thought about the life they had built together, brick by brick, day by day. I love you, she said finally. I have loved you from almost the moment I met you, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Ashford replied, my priceless girl, my everything. They stayed on the porch until the night grew cool, then went inside hand in hand. The house was quiet, the children grown and gone to their own lives. But it was not empty. It was full of memories and love and the promise of more years to come. That fall, Sarah married Thomas in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Superior. Victoria cried watching her daughter walk down the aisle in the dress they had made together. Ashford gave Sarah away with pride and a few tears of his own. At the reception, Ashford and Victoria danced together, and Victoria was transported back to that first dance 30 years ago, when they were just beginning to fall in love. We did good, Ashford murmured as they swayed to the music. Look at our children. They are happy and healthy and making their own lives. We did very good, Victoria agreed. I could not be prouder of them. Andrew and Emma announced at Christmas that they were expecting their first child, making Ashford and Victoria grandparents for the first time. The baby, a boy they named Ashford Jr., was born in May of 1913. Holding her grandson for the first time, Victoria felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that was both bittersweet and beautiful. He looks like Andrew, she observed, studying the baby's face. But he has your eyes. Ashford looked at his grandson with wonder. A new generation, he said softly, carrying on what we started. What we built, Victoria corrected. Together. Matthew graduated from college and returned to the ranch with new ideas for water conservation and soil management. He threw himself into improving the operation, working alongside his father and brother. Ashford was proud of his youngest son's accomplishments and grateful for the help. Sarah and Thomas settled in Superior, where Thomas opened his own law practice. Sarah continued her sewing work, taking on Victoria's former clients as Victoria gradually slowed down. They had 2 daughters in quick succession, and Sarah brought them to visit the ranch often. The years rolled on, bringing more grandchildren and more gray hair. Ashford and Victoria settled into a comfortable routine, still working the ranch but letting Andrew and Matthew handle more of the physical labor. They spent their evenings on the porch, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains they had called home for so long. In the spring of 1925, Ashford fell ill with pneumonia. Victoria nursed him through it, barely leaving his bedside. For a few terrifying days she thought she might lose him, but he pulled through, weakened but alive. The illness left him more frail than before, and for the first time Victoria truly understood that they were mortal, that their time together would not last forever. "I am not ready to lose you," she told him one night, her voice breaking. "I do not know how to be in this world without you." Ashford took her hand, his grip still strong despite his illness. "You are the strongest person I have ever known," he said. You would survive, but I am not going anywhere yet. I still have more years to spend with you, many more if I have anything to say about it. And he did. He recovered slowly but surely, regaining most of his strength. The scare made them both more conscious of time, more grateful for each day they had together. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1925, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and family came from all over, filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. There was food and music and dancing, just like those long-ago socials in Superior. At one point, Ashford pulled Victoria onto the makeshift dance floor they had set up in the yard. The musicians were playing an old waltz, and they moved together with the ease of 4 decades of practice. 40 years, Ashford said, shaking his head in wonder. Where did the time go into this? Victoria replied, gesturing at the celebration around them. Into our children and grandchildren, into the ranch and the life we built. The time did not go anywhere. It became this. I would not change a single moment, Ashford said. Well, maybe I would change the circumstances of how we met. I wish you had not had to go through that pain. But it led me to you, Victoria said, and that makes everything worth it. Do you understand, Ashford? Even knowing how hard it would be, even knowing what I would lose, I would do it all again just to end up here with you. Ashford pulled her closer, resting his cheek against her hair. I love you so much, he whispered. More now than ever before. You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. And you are still my hero, Victoria replied. The man who called me priceless when the world called me damaged. The man who saw value in me when I could not see it myself. They danced until the sun set, surrounded by the people they loved in the home they had made. And Victoria thought about that frightened girl on the auction platform, certain her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right. That a tall cowboy with gray eyes was about to change her world. That she would find love and happiness and a family beyond her wildest dreams. But maybe that girl had known, somewhere deep inside. Maybe when Ashford had called out his bid, when he had looked at her with those steady gray eyes and told the auctioneer she was worth every penny, maybe she had felt the first stirrings of hope. Maybe she had recognized her salvation when it came riding into town on a buckskin horse. The Xavier Ranch continued to operate successfully into the 1930s, weathering the Depression better than many thanks to careful management. And the diverse income streams from cattle, horses, and Sarah's sewing business. Ashford and Victoria moved into a smaller house Andrew had built for them, leaving the main house to Andrew and his growing family. They spent their days in gentle routine. Victoria still sewed, though her hands were not as steady as they once were. Ashford still worked with the horses, training the young ones with patience and skill. They took walks in the evening when the heat broke, and they sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play. We are old, Victoria observed one day with a laugh. She was nearly 70, Ashford 74, and both moved with the careful deliberation of people whose bodies were beginning to fail them. Speak for yourself, Ashford retorted. I am in my prime. Victoria laughed again and swatted his arm. Your prime was 40 years ago, old man. Maybe so, Ashford conceded. But I would not go back. I like being old with you. I like our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. I like sitting on this porch with nothing more pressing to do than watch the sun set. This is a good life, Victoria. The best life. It is, Victoria agreed softly. The very best. In the fall of 1938, Ashford fell asleep in his chair on the porch and did not wake up. He was 82 years old and had lived a full, rich life. But Victoria, at 76, felt like her world had ended. The man who had been her partner for more than 50 years was gone, and she did not know how to exist without him. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over Arizona to pay their respects. Ashford had been respected and loved in the community, known for his integrity and kindness. Victoria sat through the service in a daze, her children on either side of her, and tried to process the reality that she would never see his smile again, never hear his voice. In the weeks after, she moved through life mechanically. She ate because her children insisted. She slept because her body demanded it. But she felt hollow, empty in a way she had not felt since those terrible days after the bandit attack. One afternoon, she found herself walking to the spot where she and Ashford used to watch the sunset. She sank down onto the bench Ashford had built years ago and let the tears finally come. She cried for the loss of her husband, her best friend, her salvation. She cried for all the years they had had and all the years they would never have. "I do not know how to do this without you," she whispered to the wind. "You were supposed to be here. We were supposed to grow old together." But of course, they had grown old together. They had had 53 years of marriage, had raised 3 children, had built a legacy that would continue for generations. They had loved each other through hardship and joy, through struggles and triumphs. That was more than many people ever got. Victoria thought about what Ashford would say if he were there. He would tell her that she was strong enough to survive this. He would remind her that she had their children and grandchildren who needed her. He would tell her that loving him was not a debt to be repaid but a privilege to be cherished. "You called me priceless," she said aloud, her voice steadier now. "You looked at me when I was broken and afraid and you saw value. You gave me a life beyond anything I imagined. And even though you are gone, that does not change. The life we built is still here. Our children are still here. Your legacy is still here." She sat until the sun set, painting the sky in those familiar shades of red and gold. Then she stood, wiped her eyes, and walked back to her small house. She would survive this, because Ashford had taught her how to be strong. She would honor his memory by living fully, by loving their family, by carrying on the legacy they had built together. Victoria lived another 12 years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 88. She was surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren at the end, and her last words were Ashford's name. They buried her next to Ashford in the small cemetery outside Superior. The gravestone was simple, just their names and dates and a short inscription that Sarah had chosen: Ashford Xavier. 1856, 1938 Victoria Xavier. 1862, 1950 he called her priceless. She made him whole. Together they built a legacy of love. The Xavier Ranch continued to operate, passed down through the generations. Andrew's son, Ashford Jr., eventually took it over, then his son after him. The horses and cattle thrived on the Arizona land, and the family name became synonymous with quality and integrity. But more than the ranch, more than the business success, Ashford and Victoria's true legacy was the love they had shared and passed down. Their children had learned from their example what it meant to see value in people, to choose kindness, to build something lasting. Those lessons echoed through the generations, shaping the family in ways big and small. In 2025, Victoria's great-great-great-granddaughter stood in front of a museum display in Superior, Arizona, reading about the history of the area. There was a section on the Xavier Ranch, including a photograph of Ashford and Victoria taken on their 50th wedding anniversary. They sat together on a porch swing, Ashford's arm around Victoria's shoulders, both smiling at the camera with the ease of people completely comfortable in their love. The display included excerpts from Victoria's journals, which had been donated to the museum by the family. One passage in particular caught the granddaughter's attention. People sometimes ask me if I regret what happened, if I wish I could change the past. But how can I regret the path that led me to Ashford? Yes, I went through terrible things. Yes, I was hurt and afraid and treated like property. But Ashford saw through all of that. When an auctioneer called me damaged goods, Ashford said I was priceless. And he spent the rest of his life proving it to me. Our love was not conventional, and our beginning was dark. But what grew from those difficult seeds was beautiful beyond measure. I would not change a single moment, because every moment led me to him and him to me. That is worth everything. The granddaughter stood for a long time, studying the photograph and reading the words. Then she smiled and moved on to the next exhibit, carrying with her the story of a great-great-great-grandmother who had been saved by love, and a great-great-great-grandfather who had seen value where others saw none. It was a story worth remembering, a story worth passing down, a story of how one act of kindness on a dusty street in Arizona had rippled forward through generations, creating a legacy of love that would never fade. In Superior, the sun still sets over the mountains in shades of red and gold. The Xavier Ranch still operates, though it looks different now than it did in 1882. But somewhere in the evening light, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the echo of two voices speaking words that transcend time: damaged goods, priceless. And the love that followed those words, the life that grew from them, remains as eternal as the Arizona sky.